Hello, my name is Katie Williams and I work for Dengie Horse Feeds, and today I thought we would talk about keeping horses healthy in these uncertain times. So thank you for making the effort to join us. What we're going to cover today will include the sort of risks and challenges that we're facing at this time. So most particularly the sudden change of diet, which is going to be a bigger issue if you've had a horse that's in a high level of work and maybe on a high energy diet and suddenly has to stop working. So there's things we can think about there to try and reduce the risk of any digestive upsets. Also, how do we try and maintain weight and muscle tone in horses that have been working and suddenly have to stop work? And also conditioning those poor doers, again, trying to put enough condition or calories in to keep their condition without increasing the risk of digestive upsets. And then also some of the repercussions of stabling. So one of the key areas is immobility, and that has implications for digestive health. Normally being able to move around helps promote gut movement, and it also has an impact on the lymphatic system as well. So we would most frequently think of this as causing things like filled legs if a horse has been stabled for a long period of time. And I want to just share with you some tips and hints really as to how we might be able to reduce the risk of that sort of thing occurring. So that's the ground we're going to cover. Please do type some questions in and let us know what you're thinking, and we will try and answer those at the end. So without further ado, dietary management, what are the things we need to think about? Well, to be honest, it really depends on the cereal or starch content of the diet that you were on before you had to change their workload. So if you think of a racehorse on a really high starch diet, probably somewhere in the region of 25 to 30% starch in a racehorse mix or cube, and suddenly they're not working anymore, then it becomes a challenge to make that transition. We don't want to continue with the high starch diet because if they're not working, it increases the risk of digestive upsets and even muscle problems, things like what we would traditionally have called tying up, but might now be referred to as ERS. So it's if you were on maybe just a balancer and a chopped fibre feed, perhaps doing a lot lower level of work, then you may not even actually need to change the diet at all just because they're not working anymore. So it really does depend on the individual situation of how significant a problem this would actually be. So our top tip really is to try and get your horse onto a fibre and oil-based diet anyway, so it doesn't really matter then if their workload changes. Your biggest criteria or factor that you're going to consider as to how much you're feeding will then be their weight and their condition. So if they're putting on too much weight on that ration, you'd bring it back and sort of reduce the amount, but it wouldn't really matter if your horse was on box rest or in hard work. You can still use fibre and oil as energy sources. So that's a good thing to try and sort of implement straight away, get them onto a fibre and oil based ration, and then it doesn't matter if the workload varies in the coming months. The reason they're safe is that fibre and oil are both slow release energy, so they don't cause problems that starch would cause, as I mentioned, things like colic and muscle problems. And that's really what we're trying to do. It's just trying to reduce the risk all the time, because there's never going to be a cast iron guarantee that your horse won't get a problem. All we're trying to do is reduce the chances of that happening. What else can we do to keep the gut healthy? Well, digestive enhancers, things like yeast and prebiotics, help digestion. So yeast is actually going to reach the hindgut where it helps to break up the fibre particles that the bacteria then come and utilise and release the energy for the horse to make the most of. Prebiotics are slightly different. They're not live, they're a sort of feed ingredient, and they are specific to certain bacteria in the gut. So FOS prebiotics, for example, feed the good bacteria. If you're using MOS prebiotics, they actually latch on to harmful ones and stop them from becoming established. So you could use either or both if you wanted to, but they're a great way to help the horse deal with any sudden change of diet, because it helps maintain a healthy population of bacteria that are better adapted to adjust to a change of ration. And the other key top tip really is to try and use digestible fibres. So things that are broken down easily in the gut are far less likely to cause an impaction colic. So if you have a horse that's had a history of colic, then the more digestible materials you put in, the lower there is a risk of that occurring again. And we always joke at Dengie that the alpha beta, as you can see here in this picture, looks a bit like a cow pat, but it is amazing how palatable horses find it. It's a very simple formulation, just unmolashed sugar beet and and molasses alfalfa joined together in about a 50-50 ratio, and it soaks up to create a very sort of green, sloppy looking mash. And basically you can make it as wet or as dry within reason, as long as it's properly soaked, as you want it to be to suit your horse. So it's great for horses with diastemas or those that might have some other difficulty chewing. But it's very digestible. So alfalfa and sugar beet are both fibre sources that we would call super fibres, which just basically means that you get them into the digestive system, the horse can break them down and utilise them really easily. At the opposite end of the spectrum, you'd have things like straw, which would be considered very indigestible, and that would provide fibre, so encourage chewing and gut motility, etc., but the horse wouldn't extract much nutrition from it. So by using digestible fibre sources such as alfalfa and sugar beet, you're putting fibre into the gut, but the horse can actually then break it down efficiently and get energy and other useful nutrients from it. So if we have the situation where we've got a horse that's a poor doer, and we need to try and promote weight gain, when we're in this sort of lockdown situation and restricted exercise, or we're not competing as much and they may be stabled for longer periods, then the aim is to try and do it with as low a starch level as possible. When we put starch into the digestive system, it increases the risk of things like colic, gastric ulcers, laminitis. So to reduce our risk, we just need to keep starch levels as low as it's possible to do. So if we can, switching away from a cereal-based feed like a cool mix to something that's based on fibre and potentially some oil as well, it is going to inevitably bring the starch levels down. As an example, things like alpha beet or alpha original would have an energy value of around 10 megajoules per kilo, and that's equivalent to a cool mix or a good high fibre cube. If you need more calories or more energy for work, then you can move up to things like alpha oil, which has the same energy level as a conditioning mix, but around 10 times less starch. Now, it's important to point out that traditional conditioning cubes and mixes would have been in the region of 25 to 30% starch. There are some newer versions that would be perhaps a bit lower, maybe 10, 15, 18% starch, but they are still much higher than using fibre and oil. So alpha A oil, the alpha original, the alpha A range basically only has around 2% starch. So even if a mix is 10 or 12% starch, which is low for a cereal-based feed, they're still going to be 5 to 6 times higher than what you would be putting into a horse if you were using alpha oil, for example. And the other benefit of using a chopped fibre source over a mix or cube is the increased chew time. It takes 3 times as long, pretty much, to chew the same weight of chopped fibre as it does a cereal-based feed. And you can see the large Stubbs bowl shaped sort of scoop in this image here. That only holds around 400 grams of alpha oil, so less than half a kilo. So to get the same weight for weight basis, you'd be using, what, 2.5 scoops to get to a kilo of alpha oil, and that would be less than a full scoop of mix. So if you want to promote chew time and all the benefits we associate with that, as in saliva production, reduces the risk of ulcers, etc., then chopped fibre is a great option. And obviously, as I sort of mentioned or alluded to earlier, it's so safe. We recommend alpha oil, which is our highest calorie or highest energy feed for horses, even on box rest and recuperating from injury or illness, because it's based on fibre and oil. It's so safe to use even that sort of extreme situation. It's key to think about less being more in the context of when we're trying to promote weight gain. Okay, we don't want to overload the digestive system, even when it comes to using forages or high fibre feeds in the bucket. If we can do lots of small meals, it keeps the period of time the gut is empty shorter, which is beneficial, and it helps to maximise digestibility. The more time we give the digestive system and the bugs that live within it to break things down, the better they will do it. So timing is everything, as well as trying to think less is more. We would always advocate ad lib forage for anything other than a good doer. So in this situation, if you have to stable, just try and give them as much of the appropriate forage as you can, and the more you give them, the more they can make use of that as an energy source. The less bucket feed you'll probably need to use anyway. And the key is to think digestibility, digestibility, digestibility. So with a poor doer, where we're trying to promote weight gain, we want a forage that is very soft and leafy, because that is usually an indication that it's going to be more digestible once it gets into the digestive tract. and therefore the horse will gain more nutrition from it. At the opposite end of the spectrum, if you happen to have a good doer, then you want a coarse stalky forage. So almost the more like straw it looks, the more like straw it will probably be nutritionally, because you want the chew time without the calories. And so if you are lucky enough to be able to sort of liaise with the person that produces your forage for you, try talking to them. If you've got good doers and they're willing to cut it a bit later for you, that's great, because it's likely to be more mature and therefore less digestible, and great for a good doer. Whereas if you have a poor doer, trying to get them to cut it earlier with the weather permitting, then it'll be more digestible and you will get, or your horse will get more nutrition from it. Some other sort of management tips, really. We know that standing still decreases the ability of the lymph system to get rid of the waste materials from normal metabolism. So unlike the circulatory system, which has the heart to pump the fluid, the blood, around the body, the lymphatic system doesn't have that pump. So it's relying on movement to create pressure to move the lymph through a series of lymph nodes. And the nodes are like little beads. So once the fluid accumulates in there, it builds up, and then eventually there's enough pressure to push open the bead and it travels along to the next one. And it's the number of nodes, lymph nodes, that the horse has, which is quite high, especially compared to a human, at around 8,000 compared to just 600 in us. It's those lymph nodes that slow the movement of the lymph, and that's why it's really important that we try and allow our horses to exercise as much as possible. And also because nearly half of the, or around half of the nodes, of the total amount of nodes the horse has, are actually in the colon, so in the large intestine, the ascending colon. The actual act of eating, and the peristalsis, which is the technical term, if you like, for the movement of the gut, that actually helps to also put pressure on the lymph system and move the lymph through those nodes. So both movement and eating both help to ensure the lymphatic system is working efficiently. So for that reason, really, if we can try to exercise our horses, if they are stabled, for around maybe 2 to 3 times a day for around 15 to 20 minutes each time, rather than one 60-minute session, for example, that will help, because it's that kind of repeated movement and mobility that will stop the lymph sort of accumulating and maybe pooling in the lower limbs of the horse. So if we can work them in hand, if we can't ride, or maybe long rein, that's great. Just walking them up and down the road will help, obviously with all the restrictions, etc., permitting. And it is also really important, if you are still able to work your horse, that you warm up and cool down regularly. And this is a tip that will apply later on as well. Once you get back up to working your horse properly, you should be spending at least 15 to 20 minutes warming up, obviously, but also then at the other end cooling down, because it allows the lymph system to clear the rubbish produced, or the waste product produced as a result of the metabolism that occurs during exercise. And as I mentioned, feeding plenty of fibre throughout the day to promote that gut movement, or the peristalsis, is going to be beneficial too. So we always like to include a case study at Dengie whenever we do a presentation, because I think that brings things to life when you can see that it actually works. And this is one, it's actually probably nearly 5 years old now, or over 5 years from when we first started to work with him. But it's just a great example, and hopefully offers you some reassurance that utilising fibre and oil as energy sources can achieve fantastic results in terms of weight gain. You don't have to default to large amounts of cereals. They may well be a part of the ration, but getting the fibre right is equally, if not more so, important. So this is Gizmo. You can actually see he's too weak to stand, so he's laying down on our weighbridge, and you probably can't quite read the display reader in the actual photo, but it is 92 kilos, and he was thought to be at the time about 4 months old. The elevated liver enzymes are possibly a reflection of some toxin sort of intake. Maybe he's eaten ragwort because he's so hungry, or sometimes you can see elevated liver enzymes as a result of an infection, which may well be the case in a horse in this condition. So the vets that rescued him or took responsibility for him actually put him onto a product that was based on straw, and this was in the bucket feed. And you can see from the graph, for the first month he's pretty much plateauing and slightly going down, to be honest. So in consultation with us at Dengie and the nutrition team, we recommended a sort of revising that ration, so something that's much more digestible. And for a horse that's in such poor condition, they need all the help they can get to get every scrap of nutrition out of the forage or fibre materials that you're giving. So rather than using straw, we've moved him onto a sugar beet, so on-the-lash sugar beet, with our Hi-Fi Senior product. That might seem a bit odd given that he's only 4 months old at this stage, but for the same reason that we might use a really digestible fibre source for an old horse, it applies to a youngster as well in this condition. The Hi-Fi Senior contains alfalfa and grass, which is naturally sweet, so might well tempt him to eat, as well as a little bit of molasses, again to add a little bit of sweetness, because we've got to get these horses eating, and the chances are he's never seen bucket feed and doesn't know what it is, so it's got to be pretty palatable to tempt him to eat. But the grass itself also is really digestible, so once it gets into the digestive system along with the alfalfa, it's going to be broken down really easily, and he will actually start to get some nutrition from it. As with most horses, we would use a balancer to balance the ration. In this case, it's the Performance Plus balancer. It could have been a stud balancer, and what you need is just those high levels of essential nutrients, trace minerals like copper, etc., to support growth. And then in this case, we did use a little bit of cereal meal, around 400 grams, just to provide some energy that he can readily access. But as you can see, the emphasis is very much on a fibre-based diet, really quality digestible fibre with a little bit of cereal initially to get him going, and obviously ad lib haylage, although in this condition he wasn't eating very much at all. And as with any new ration, but particularly in this sort of scenario, we introduced it very gradually, and over a period of 7 to 10 days started to sort of build it up. And you can see how his growth started to improve and the condition came on, and it's just simply as a result of getting the right products, the right materials into his ration that are digestible, that he can break down more easily. So much so that actually by the time we get to the summer, so sort of July, August, we were having to change him off of these really digestible fibre sources and put him onto our simple sort of Hi-Fi Original with a balancer. He actually gained around about 90% of his own sort of body weight in those 4 months, and at the time we weighed him in July was around about 175 kilos. So it just goes to show that a fibre-based ration, if you get the fibres right, it can have an amazing effect. And I think you'll agree he's now true to type in that he's become a good doer, as you'd expect a sort of coloured cob to be. So that concludes the presentation. So if you have any questions, please do share them, and we'll try and answer them now. Thank you for listening.